taking place in a hybrid format, I would like to start the meeting by providing you with some information following the motion that was adopted in the House on Wednesday, September 23rd, 2020. The committee is now sitting in a hybrid format, meaning that members can participate either in person or by video conference. All members, regardless of their method of participation, will be counted for the purpose of quorum. The committee's power to sit is, however, limited by the party use of House resources, which is determined by the whips. All questions must be decided by recorded vote unless the committee disposes of them with unanimous consent or on division. And finally, the committee may deliberate in camera, providing that it takes into account the potential risks to confidentiality inherent to such deliberations with remote participants. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. For those participating virtually, members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. Before speaking, click on the microphone icon to activate your own mic. When you are done speaking, please put your mic on mute to minimize any interference. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Should members need to request the floor outside of their designated time for questions, they should activate their mic and state that they have a point of order. If a member wishes to intervene on a point of order that has been raised by another member, they should use the raise hand function. This will signal to the chair your interest to speak and create a speakers list. In order to do so, you should click on participants at the bottom of the screen. When the list pops up, you will see next to your name that you can click raise hand. When speaking, speak slowly and clearly. And unless there are exceptional circumstances, the use of headsets with a boom microphone is mandatory for everyone participating remotely. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise the chair. And please note that we may need to suspend a few minutes as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. For those participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Should you wish to get my attention, signal me with a hand gesture, or at an appropriate time, call out my name. Should you wish to raise a point of order, wait for an appropriate time and indicate to me clearly that you wish to raise a point of order. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Okay. Now I need to switch to the proper language. And I see we have a speakers list. I see first on the list is Ms. Rempel-Garner. Ms. Rempel-Garner, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, I move that the Standing Committee on Health commence a study on the emergency situation facing Canadians in light of the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that this study evaluate, review, and examine all issues relevant to this situation. And that this study begin no later than October 20th, 2020, that the committee table its findings in the House upon completion, that the government provide a response to these findings within 30 sitting days, and that evidence and documentation received by the committee during its study of the Canadian response to the outbreak of the coronavirus commenced during the first session of the 43rd Parliament be taken into consideration by the committee in the current study, and that each party will be entitled to 1 witness per 1 hour witness panel and 2 witnesses per 2 hour witness panel. And that in order to fully study this emergency situation, an order of the committee do issue for all memoranda, emails, documents, notes, or other records from the Prime Minister's Office, the Privy Council Office, the Office of the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Office of the Minister of Health, Health Canada, and the Public Health Agency of Canada concerning options, plans, and preparations for the global public health. Innovation, Science, and Industry, each to appear separately before the committee for at least 3 hours, provided that in respect, each of them who does not agree within 1 week of the adoption of this motion to accept this invitation for the length of time prescribed, the chair shall be instructed to report to the House forthwith a recommendation that this committee be empowered to order his or her appearance from time to time. So, Mr. Chair, it's now been over a week since this matter was first discussed in this committee. I just firmly believe that we need to move on with this. I realize that members of the committee last time, certain members of them, I think that they tried to extend the meeting so that this wouldn't come to a vote. So I just think we need to move on. We've been prorogued for some time. The documents that I've mentioned in here for production are all relevant to the study. And we just need to move on with this. This is a very reasonable motion. It allows all members of the committee to look at areas related to the pandemic that are of interest to them and to their community or to their broader constituency groups. It allows each political party to have one witness It's per panel, and we're going to have that documentation that we need as parliamentarians to review the government's response. I would just like to say, you know, I'm in Ottawa today. I feel for the restaurants in the city that you know, have perhaps taken out the last of their savings to sort of stay open over the last few months. They're shut down again. Toronto, you know, a large part of Quebec is in this situation. And I think about my home province of Alberta, where we're seeing cases on the rise too. And it's very incumbent on this committee for us to dispose of this matter and to move on and to study this so that we can come up with a plan for Canadians. Um, I'm really hoping that members of this committee will allow this motion to come to a vote today, that we can move on with life, and that given that members of the committee have had over a week to review the substantive components of this motion, that we can just move on with life. So I would encourage all members to support this. I think it's in the best interest of all of our constituents. I purposely tried to word it in a way such that it's nonpartisan. We're just looking for answers, and we're just looking for a way forward. So I come to you with a spirit of collaboration, that we can work together across party lines to get some answers and provide the government with a path forward, some recommendations that they could look at, and possibly give Canadians some hope, especially those who are being faced with, you know, isolation and more shutdown. So that is the spirit of this motion. I strongly hope that the Liberals don't filibuster it this time, that we can vote in favor of it, and that we can move on and start planning our study. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Rempel-Garner. I note that you keep referring to this time and that this matter was not voted on before. This is a new motion, and in the spirit of collaboration, I would appreciate getting a copy of it so I could review it.
Sure.
And I believe the other members would prefer a copy as well.
Sure. So, Mr. Chair, I can send that along. What I've done, because it's my understanding that some members of the Liberal Party perhaps didn't want a prescriptive list of all the study areas. So all I've done is remove the prescriptive list from the motion that I put forward on Friday, because the opening text of of the motion that I presented a week Friday already includes all areas related to the pandemic. So, and then I did add a line related to every party having at least one witness per panel. I think that that's pretty reasonable and pretty standard operating procedure. And I think that that'll give clarity to you as chair for how to put witness panels together on this. And, you know, in this way, then every member can, you know, decide what's important to them. Every political party can decide what's important to them in the study of this. I know certainly for me, I think a lot of the issues that were related in the document production order were material to me. The other thing that I believe I removed one paragraph related to ventilators because it was already included in one of the document production orders anyways, just for clarity, but that was it. So it should be pretty easy for the government to support this. There's nothing in there that's, I think, inflammatory language or partisan. This is really just about getting answers and moving forward in a productive way for the Health Committee.
Okay. Thank you. And have you sent that motion to me? And
I've been talking, so no. To be honest with you, Chair, I wasn't sure if you'd recognize me first or not. So I'm happy to do that while we're sitting here. But it is in order.
Point of order. No, I'm new to all this, and I've been here a year, but I'm not sure all what you can ask a point of order. But can I ask for us to have 5 minutes to discuss this? I don't even remember everything that was in that motion. I think we have to look at it a little before we decide what to do with it. Is it possible to recess for 5 minutes to get a copy of this and to read it again?
On that point of order, Chair.
Go ahead.
I will say something. If this is a ploy to permanently suspend the meeting today, I would not be in favor of that. And I just want to register my objection that if this is to give you direction to shut the meeting down so that we don't have come to a vote, as we've seen in other committees, I don't support that. And I think that would be fairly bad. I'm happy to suspend for 5 minutes to give me a chance to send it around to folks. But I would ask that you commit to reconvening at 11:30 a.m. Eastern at the latest. And I just want to say to my colleagues, come prepared to these meetings. Like I understand that Liberals may have sent motions around, and I'm assuming that had they got the floor, they might have moved this. And I was prepared to amend that motion on the fly. People should be coming to these committees prepared. So when I walk through the changes that I made to a motion on Friday, you should be able to do that on the fly too. So if we can, I'm happy to suspend to 11:30, but beyond that, we need to move on with life.
Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Rumpel-Garner. Mr. Kilroy, please.
I think everyone here is trying to come together in the spirit of collaboration and cooperation and not just make them hollow words. But when I hear certainly a lecture coming from us, from Michelle Gardner-Rempel on being prepared, it's hard to be prepared for motions when you get them while you're live on television. And there seems to be a complete and utter lack of credibility by saying, be ready for something that I'm going to send you while you're on Zoom. I find it utterly ridiculous.
On that point of order, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, frankly, a committee business meeting, anybody can move anything they want on a study. So it's actually our job as parliamentarians to be ready. So that was a little patronizing.
Not at all. Not at all.
It actually, and also a little ridiculous to think that you can't come prepared to a committee business meeting, especially when I walked through what the changes were. Anyway, I think the best course of action forward, I would support a 10-minute recess to 11:30 a.m. I will send this around, and then perhaps members can review that quickly, and we can move forward.
Mr. Chair, may I say something?
Thank you, Ms. Rumpel-Garner. Mr. Kilroy, go ahead.
The only way for us to clearly understand the motions that come for us is actually having time to look at them before they come. Now, if the member is saying that we should all be Kretzkin, then that's a metaphysical discussion we probably should have at a later date.
Mr. Chair, just on this point of order,
Mr. Barlow, please go ahead.
If I may, Ms. Rumpel-Garner's point here is this motion is 98% what was presented to this committee more than a week ago. I have it in front of me. I followed along with the changes that were made. So for Mr. Kilroy to say that this is somehow a whole new motion that we just threw on the floor here today, I think is completely disingenuous. As members of this committee, we are dealing with one of the most important issues all of our constituents want us to be talking about. This motion is part of that. They want to see a strategy, a runway to how we get through this, but that also includes to how we got here. This is a matter of trust. So this motion is very detailed, and it is almost identical to the motion that was tabled in this committee more than a week ago. So for the other members of this committee from the Liberal Party to be saying that we're somehow submarining them or dropping this dictionary upon them, I think is really unfair. And to say this is some sort of Kretzkin mind reading ploy, I don't think is fair. I think if we take 5 or 10 minutes, as Ms. Rumpel-Garner has offered to do, to review this motion and the small changes that are as part of this motion that was tabled on this committee more than a week ago, I think that is totally fair.
Mr. Chair, on that point of order, if I could, it's
yes,
great. It's great that Mr. Barlow has it in front of him. We don't. Now, I don't know if it's been sent around in English or French.
Mr. Barlow doesn't.
Excuse me, everyone. Mr. Fisher has the floor.
He doesn't have the motion.
We don't have this, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if Mr. Theriault has this in front of him in French. Mr. Barlow says he does have it in front of him. That's great. We would like to have this in front of us in English and French.
I have the previous motion in front of me.
Mr. Chair,
ridiculous.
So every word is important. We need to review it. And with due respect, with, Mr. Theriault, if it's in bilingual, they need to read in French too. So I just want to ask Mr. Rumpel-Garner, it's a bilingual, and because we have to respect our other party too, Bloc Québécois, which Mr. Theriault read in French.
Yes,
Mr. Chair.
Just on that point of order, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I'm going to recognize Mr. Davies first. He hasn't had a chance to speak.
Thank you. Well, just first as a matter of procedure, it seems to me that people are just jumping in, and it seems whoever puts their hand up and starts talking is being recognized. I saw Miss Sidhu had her hand up before Mr. Fisher jumped in, and yet you recognize Mr. Fisher. So not to pick on Mr. Fisher, it's just an example. But the first thing I want to get straight here is, what is the speaking order and how is that determined? It can't just be whoever grabs the microphone and starts talking. And you're not respecting either the raised hands list or the order of visual calling on the screen. It just seems to be that the speakers are determining who gets recognized. So I'd like to register, for all of our sakes, we need to come to an agreement on a respectful, appropriate speaking order. Second of all, to the point of order at hand, I also think we need to decide as a committee how we're going to proceed on this. Ms. Rempel-Garner is absolutely correct. There is no requirement that any motion that is moved at a business meeting relating to business has to be in writing. There is no requirement. Now, if the committee wants to make such a requirement, we certainly can, but there is no such requirement. Again, to Ms. Sidhu's comment, it doesn't have to be bilingual because it doesn't even have to be in writing. Mr. Theriault could raise a motion from the floor if he wished, and he could raise that in French. Now, what I would suggest is it's very helpful for all of us on any kind of motion, particularly one that has any length or complexity, for it to be reduced in writing. What we typically do in these meetings is once someone has moved the motion from the floor orally, we then take a moment to make sure that the clerk reads it out and we all write it down ourselves so that we have it in front of us. That is the way this committee has operated. Now, if you want to have a rule that motions have to be submitted in writing prior to the meeting or not, then we can make that decision. But that is not in the standing orders of this committee presently, and I think that needs to be emphasized. I also want to say there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with my colleague Mr. Pawlowski's request. If a motion does come and it's in writing, and we get it in writing and it has complexity to it, absolutely we can take a moment to talk about it. But I would like to say that I would like to have those discussions on the record. Now, if a party needs to caucus for a period of time, I totally respect that. I have an easy caucus for myself. So that's, if the Liberals or the Conservatives or anybody else needs to do that, I'm fine with that. But I guess to sum up what I'm saying is, I think it would be good for all of us if we come to an agreement on how we're recognized as speakers and how motions will be presented to each other, because it is true that we all deserve to have the motion clearly in front of us and clearly understood in both official languages prior to having a sensible debate on it.
Thank you, Mr. Davies, and we'll cut the debate off here. Pardon me. Firstly, Mr. Davies, I appreciate your comments regarding recognizing speakers. We do have a hand raised function on the participants panel. I was interpreting that to reflect the regular speaking order, not on intermediate points of order. I'm doing the best I can to identify people when they identify they want to respond to the point of order. On the point of order, and in the spirit of collaboration that Ms. Rempel-Garner mentioned, and the fact that we do need to properly review the motion before we proceed, we will suspend. I will suspend for 1/2 hour, and we will resume in 30 minutes. Thank you very much. Mr. Kellaway was kicked off his session and lost his position on the speaking order. I'll now recognize Mr. Kellaway. I believe he wanted to speak.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and appreciate this time to talk a little bit about the last meeting and this meeting. And I'm a little frustrated. It occurred to me once I stepped back from the last meeting and this one, and hopefully that'll change, that Mrs. Rempel-Gardner obviously didn't intend, in my opinion, for her motion to pass during last Friday's meeting. If she had, she would have shared it with the Liberal members of the committee in advance, as it seemed to have been done with the other opposition members. And Ms. Rempel-Gardner has considerable committee experience. She has considerable experience being a member of a governing party and an opposition party, and I have no doubt that she knows the importance of compromise when it comes to moving forward in a collaborative way. And this is true of a minority government, for a minority government, as it is true of an opposition party, since neither has the numbers to pass what they want without agreement from enough members to proceed. One moment, please. Just having a little technical difficulty here. So thank you. Just a little problem with my screen here. Presumably, this is why she seems to have shared her motion with the opposition members. However, if it had been shared with the Liberal Party members in advance, and I'm confident that she knows this, we would have had an opportunity to review it and find a path forward, and I'm hoping that's still the case. But not sharing it in advance, it was impossible last week to pass the motion, and that should be even more clear now. As here we are once again, the table dropped a motion, dropped a motion rather, and pretended it was possible for anyone to be completely prepared to respond to it. This seems to me, and I know I'm a newbie to politics, but it seems to be a bit of a game, and I think many would think that way. Mr. Chair, I have no doubt that she.
Chair? Point of order?
Yes.
I'm sorry, who's speaking?
Larry.
Larry, please go ahead on a point of order.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, this is, we were through this already a little bit a while ago in our earlier part of our meeting. The motion that we have before us today is exactly the same as the one before, with the letters taken out of it, the first page. Some were saying that they didn't have it. Well, we have all had it. It's all there, and it's in different wording.
That's not a point of order. Mr. Kellaway can continue in his speech.
Well, I'm just saying that it's a bit disingenuous to say that we don't have it.
This is getting into debate. Mr. Kellaway does have the floor for debate. Please go ahead, Mr. Kellaway.
Mr. Chair, I hate to interrupt, but I'm wondering.
Mr. Van Bylen, go ahead.
As a point of order, Ms. Rempel-Gardner waltzed through her changes fairly quickly, and now that we have the new document, I would see some benefit in going through the changes, right, highlighting the changes that she's made. That would be more helpful for me as well.
Thank you, Ms. Van Bylen. It's also not a point of order. Mr. Kellaway, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll pick up where I left off. It actually ties into, I think, this stream of conversation. I have no doubt that there are some that will say that we're the ones for stalling the committee and preventing important work from being done. And honestly, this is what frustrates me, and I think it frustrates a lot of Canadians. I'm disappointed that the Conservative approach to this committee for this new session of Parliament seems to be a lot of theatre and not focused on action. Their objective appears to be to make it impossible for any real work to be done while pretending that they're trying to do important work. So this motion is simply too big.
Mike, are you just going to mansplain for a bit, or are we going to get to something here?
Mr. D'Entremont, I'm
new to the parliamentary procedures, but I'm wondering if mansplain is an acceptable terminology.
Yeah.
You know,
offensive.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
It's quite offensive to many people.
Hold up, everybody. Hold up, everybody.
Since the mansplaining is happening to me, I would
Ms. Rempel-Gardner, you do not have the floor. Mr. D'Entremont, you do not have the floor. Please do not interject. Please do not interrupt the speakers other than a valid point of order. Mr. Kellaway, you have the floor.
Are we sure we have the floor here?
You have the floor.
Okay, just want to make sure. So it seems to me their objective is, again, to make it impossible for anything to get done. The motion is simply too big. It's simply too big to create any productive study with or without a global pandemic at our feet. And for me, it doesn't allow us to go to look into particular issues in depth. And it certainly doesn't allow us to do any good for Canadians. So frankly, to me, it seems as though it was drafted without any real desire to assist Canadians through this pandemic. Now, it's workable, but certainly not usable as it currently stands. Now, many parts of our motion completely minimize the importance of an issue or request that we study a topic that has already been resolved. And I'm hopeful that at least some of my colleagues across the table want to do the right thing to help Canadians and will listen to what I have to say. Now, I'd like to provide some explanation from my perspective, because I think that most, if not all of my colleagues, will be able to relate or at least understand what I'm coming from and where I'm coming from. You know, I decided to run for Parliament out of a desire to give back to my community, to my constituents in Cape Breton Canso, and to Canadians. And like all of my colleagues, I want to be their voice in the House of Commons, and especially at committee. And I really feel fortunate to sit on the Standing Committee of Health, especially during these challenging times, and they are challenging. And I feel that this committee is one of, and perhaps the most important committee right now for Canadians. And there's so many important studies that we could be taking on. I look at one study, my colleague, Mr. Van Buyden, study on mental health. The effects of COVID is clearly one of those important considerations. I look to my colleague, Ms. Sadhu's proposed study on the long-term care is another. Now, these are real studies, and they're designed based on the needs of Canadians and the interests expressed by all parties in the committee and the House. Their design was intentional to ensure that we would have the support so that we could commence them as quickly as possible to get Canadians the help they need and deserve. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, even Ms. Rempel-Gardner commented on the significance of these issues during the debate in this committee the past Friday, and by including them in her omnibus motion. My colleagues chose issues that are relevant and critical to what the committee does and should be doing at a pivotal moment in our country's history. So I want to stress, I'm by no means suggesting that these are the only good ideas, because the essence of a committee and the committee work is around compromise. And I referred to it earlier in our last meeting around Team Canada. And we work best when we're working together. And we discuss, the interest of Canadians and what we should undertake and when and how we should undertake it. In fact, this is how our committee generally operated, if you remember, even throughout the early months of COVID. And we did not always agree, and that's okay. But it was always clear that everyone who sat on the committee, whether it was the Liberals or Conservatives or Bloc Québécois and NDP, all had a common goal, and that common goal was to be productive. That's why I'm disappointed to see what's happened in the past couple of meetings, and I'm frustrated to see that there seems to be some partisan games being played here, and we have to get to work at putting more motions forward that have purpose and meaning and are doable. And I also want to briefly note that it's been suggested that we've lost time to do a prorogation, and so I don't think that's accurate. Prior to prorogation, this committee already decided to reduce its sitting days from the months of July and August. And as I understand it, and again, I'm new to politics, prorogation allows governments to stop and to refocus. And 1 year ago, when the speech was made from the throne, Canada was in a different place. And in fact, the world was in a different place. And even if our priorities remain as important to us now as they did then, the world has been plagued by a pandemic that has caused all of us to rethink our day-to-day lives. And for some, and we all have stories in our lives, for some it's working from home. For others, it's homeschooling children or finding a safe way to care for loved ones. So it is logical that a government would need time to pause and reflect and refocus attention. There was no summer breaks. There was very little time for reflection, particularly for members of this committee. Now, at the time of prorogation, the pandemic was sufficiently controlled that it provided an opportunity for us to take a step back and reassess our priorities. And since that time, we've seen case numbers spike in real terrifying ways. So once again, we need to act, and we need to protect Canadians. We need to prevent the situation from getting out of hand. We've already seen the devastating effects that have occurred, actually, in other countries. And I think we've done well in Canada, but we need to keep at it, keep doing better, because better is always possible. So it's premature to request documents in the manner that's been set out in the motion. And receiving a massive package of documents that we all need to sort through is I think, unproductive. Rather, as each topic is studied, documents can be requested from the witnesses that appear before the committee, as they often are. This will ensure that we receive the relevant documents at the time we're studying each issue. This will also help us know what documents are relevant to our study, as witnesses can point us in the right direction, which they often do through their expertise and experience. And certainly that would be more efficient and a helpful way to request documents. The way they have been requested in this motion is somewhat problematic, and not only because of the challenges it will present for us and the fact that it won't enable us rather to effectively do our jobs, but also because of the human and financial cost it will entail. And need I remind all the members that the public service continues to work around the clock with real objectives to help all Canadians. Every time documents are requested, whether the request is large or small, it is our hardworking public servants who have to look to the documents, compile them, and translate them. And Mr. Chair, this country's bilingualism is one of the greatest strengths of our country, but it also requires that time and money are spent on translation. This means that documents can't be produced as quickly. And not only that, but it's also important to consider the amount of time these document searches take. Every person involved does their utmost to ensure this search is thorough. This takes days, weeks, and perhaps even months. And each person involved in that search is taken away from doing their work in order to do this, which means that fewer people are working on the issues that matter most to Canadians. This does not only apply to hardworking public servants who work in government departments, but when the production of document requests relate to ministers and to their offices, the same logic applies to all of those people as well. Stopping preparing essential legislation, stopping critical engagement with stakeholders, and going through every email, every memo, every note in order to ensure that these requests are satisfied. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting in any way transparency is not important. Of course it is. We would all agree with that. I know that there are some that will try to paint this as a government trying to avoid being open and transparent with Canadians, but that could not be further from the truth. And the truth is that there's a balance between transparency and efficiency. And all I'm suggesting is that the right balance needs to be struck so that we do not unnecessarily delay or restrict the government's capacity to do the work Canadians want us to do. In fact, that need us to do the work. Canadians are counting on us. On top of the fact that hardworking public servants that are doing critical work of helping Canadians and keeping people safe they'll be forced to redirect their efforts to filling these orders. It's worth noting that given that most, if not all, people are working from home, locating these documents poses a challenge. Most people are not in their offices at the moment because they can't be. Daily case counts in Quebec and Ontario have been, I think, over 1,000 and are rising. People need to be able to work from home. This makes locating documents, quite frankly, even more time-consuming and challenging. So it happens that, I think that it happens that, it seems to me anyway, that Conservatives don't seem to be concerned about that. But I think Canadians care about these things. And we care about these things. And we're here because Canadians elected us. So I'd like to do the work that Canadians need us to do. Because if we don't, the situation will not improve. Now, I obviously cannot support this motion as is presently drafted, and quite frankly, I'm not sure anyone can. To be a workable motion, the production of document requests need to be removed, and the date needs to be changed from October 20th to another logical date. And I'm hopeful that my colleagues across the way will make these changes, and we can be supported by all members in doing so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kellaway. I see Mr. Van Bynen is next on the list. I'm sorry, Mr. Van Bynen. I'm not sure if this was on the list for this debate or was this for the original.
This was on the original motion. I had intended to put my motion forward, but I'll defer to my colleagues.
Mr. Chair, just a point of order. I'm looking at the participant raised hand list, and I'm first. I'm not even sure how Mr. Kellaway got on before me, but I'm looking straight at the participant list, and I'm the first one with my hand up.
As am I. I think that's the way the South works.
Yeah. So on my list, on my list, Mr. Van Bynen is first, followed by Ms. Sadu, followed by Mr. Barlow, followed by Dr. Pawlowski, and so on.
Well, so, I'm looking two above, and I'm staring like I don't know what list I'm looking at. And I'm above the operator. I'm the first one.
So am I on my screen, Don.
We all are on our own.
Everybody's first on their own list, right?
Well, I don't see me. Oh, okay. I see. So perhaps can you maybe reveal who the list is?
Well, at this point, and Mr. Van Bynen has, maybe you could take yourself off this list because you were intending to speak on the original, before the original motion was spoken.
There we go. How's that?
And in fact, anyone who does not wish to speak on this particular, at this particular time in the debate, if they could remove their hand. So on the list that I have before me right now, we have Ms. Sadu, Mr. Barlow, Dr. Pawlowski, Mr. McGuire, Mr. Davies, Ms. Rempel-Garner, and Mr. D'Entremont.
Okay, thank you. That clears it up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go now to Ms. Sadu. Ms. Sadu, please go ahead. Ms. Sadu, you're muted.
So, Mr. Chair.
Were you intending to speak at this point in the debate, or did you have your raise?
So after Mr. Van Bynen, so it's my turn, right, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I agree with my colleague, Mr. Calloway. I'm concerned that Ms. Rampal's motion's goal is not to get good work done for Canadians, but to I think there's more important issues for Canadians. This is now the second meeting we have spent largely on one motion and attempt to, there's important topics without any real concrete direction. Quite frankly, there are some topics in the motion that I think my all colleagues are agree, but we need to study that I know we have to find common ground on. However, it is almost, wasting of time, I can say, that if we are not working on the important topics like mental health, long-term care, or even other important issues, which is the provinces are only briefly mentioned and buried in the massive, that motion for the document production, and I cannot agree on that. I agreed, and there's a more important issue which is near and dear to Canadians when we have a second wave of COVID-19. I trust the members of the opposition do in fact want to get good work done and produce. We all want to produce solid reports to Parliament, but this motion is simply not the way to do it. The approach I would like to see the committee take to study aspect of COVID-19, whether it's a mental health, whether there's a long-term care, or any other topics related health of Canadians. Do a study on a topic, have a report, then go to the next one. For example, how are we supposed to even consider studying, first production of the documents? When there's a more important topics, we can study. Find out common grounds. Long-term care, like in my writing, which I know residents contacting me, so which is the more important, that hits hard. That is most important to me. Same thing, many my colleagues, they have important issues. So let's find a common ground. And also, there's no paid sick leave if we talked about that. Many of residents, they are contacting me about that. It's not there. I can, yesterday I was talking to someone. Why I'm talking about paid sick leave? Because it's also related to the health. I'm happy to take a moment to speak about the great work that all parties did to secure paid sick leave for Canadians. And there's a long-term care and very near dear to me. Mental health, as you know, we all have a stats, which is very, very, impacted, especially due to COVID-19. Let's find a common grounds, and then we can all work together. So betterment for Canadians. This is my urge to the committee, and that's Mr. Chair. I really want to say. And there's my motion. I want to table it, but now Ms. Rampal's motion is there, which is very important too for my residents. Mr. Chair. So let's find the common grounds. And as my colleague, Mr. Calloway said, if we are production of documents where we can relate to the important work and the good work for the healthcare workers or our public servants, this is all political games, I would say. Let's work. Let's do real work for Canadians, which is important to everyone's writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Sadhu. We go now to Mr. Barlow, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the comments from my colleagues, but there's a couple of things that really jumped out at me at their comments from Mr. Calloway and Ms. Sadhu. And I certainly respect their perspectives, but they're asking us to do in-depth studies on issues that are, for intents and purposes, provincial issues, sick leave, mental health, long-term care. For the most part, our provincial jurisdiction, and the provinces should be the ones focusing on that. But for Mr. Kellaway to say that it's too much work for this committee to be going through the documents that will be given to the committee as part of this study, I think is very short-sighted. That is our job. Our job here is to look through the documents, find the information that our constituents are asking for, and if it's going to take me all night to read documents to ensure that we have the information that we needed, then that is what I was elected here to do, is do the hard work that my constituents are expecting me to do. And there have been all-night votes. There have certainly been some long nights reading documents, but I think that is one of our responsibilities, and our constituents would expect nothing less from us. This is one of the most important issues we have ever dealt with as parliamentarians. I don't think any of us were elected and expecting to deal with something like COVID-19 that has seized our entire country and certainly our entire economy. But what Canadians are looking for is they're looking for a couple of things. They are looking for a strategy, a path forward. But to do that, we also need to understand how we got to where we are right now. And that is what this motion, I believe, which I believe is completely fair, and it's certainly not an omnibus motion. I have it sitting in front of me. It's on a page and a half. Mr. Kellaway should look at the 300-page omnibus bills that the Liberals have been putting up the last couple of years, an 800-page budget bill, if he wants to see what's an omnibus document. This is by no means overwhelming for a parliamentarian to look through this motion that is there. I think this is quite fair, and certainly there are some details that are being requested of the government, but I think that is what we need to be looking at. There's no question, Mr. Chair, that this is the number one issue our constituents are asking for. They want to know what decisions were made for the pandemic, what decisions were made, and why decisions were made when it comes to the pandemic alert system. What strategy was in place to get us to where we are right now? And I think that includes the details that these documents are going to have, and that's why I fully support the motion that Ms. Rempel-Garner has put forward, and the amended motion that I think makes it certainly much more palatable to all the parties involved. And then I don't see that there's really any reason that we should be delaying proceeding with this. To see the filibusters that are going on in the other committees, I think Canadians would be looking to the Health Committee to get some real work done. And Mr. Kellaway, this is real work to be looking at the details of the pandemic assessment, the pandemic reaction, and the plans for dealing with this crisis for Canadians across this country. So I would vehemently disagree that this motion is asking us to do too much work. I think that is exactly why our constituents voted to bring us here, in whatever party stripe we are wearing. But they are asking us to do everything we need to do to find out as much information and as many details as we possibly can about COVID-19. And that's why I would fully support that we move along on this study as quickly as possible. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Barlow. We go now to Dr. Pawlowski. Please go ahead.
Well, I too am getting frustrated with spinning our wheels here. I certainly believe with almost what everyone here has said and claims, which is that we want to actually get back to doing what we should be doing as a health committee, which is studying the health impacts of the pandemic. And instead, yes, we're spinning our wheels. But I think the Conservatives knew that when they put this motion on the table, when they put a whole bunch of things regarding procurement of documents that they knew was going to be problematic to the Liberals, and yet they chose to do that otherwise. So I kind of question how real their desire to actually start looking at things really is. What they've done in this motion is conflated two things. The first part, which says, let's get back to looking at COVID, which absolutely I agree with the second part of the document, which is about procurement of documents, which is obviously pretty problematic. There's all kinds of live issues. Now, part of the problem with the procurement of documents is they're looking at dead issues. They're looking at what's happened in the past. And if we really want to be studying, and we ought to be studying this second wave and what we can do now in terms of helping Canadians to deal with this, helping the economy to deal with it. And the best way to help the economy deal with this is through having a sound health approach. So there's all kinds of health issues that we could be out there studying, should we choose to do so. Certainly vaccines, there's all kinds of issues related to vaccines, how we could develop vaccines potentially quicker, the issue of procurement of vaccines. I absolutely agree. There's a whole bunch of issues around testing, the strategies for testing. We haven't really heard that from the Conservatives, but it's not just a matter of having rapid test kits. I think having rapid test kits is important, but there's strategies behind testing, and you have to look at the values of rapid test kits in particular circumstances, because especially if you're going to use rapid test kits where they want to use them, for instance, when you go into northern Indigenous communities or when you go into a factory, well, let's just do a rapid test kit. Well, whether that's valuable or not depends on the incidence of the disease in the population. So you have to understand that before you say, well, let's do rapid test kits and that's going to solve all the problems, because potentially it doesn't. If you have a high enough incidence of the disease in the population and you don't have a completely sensitive specific test, it doesn't help you in ruling out disease. There's also a lot of other issues. Contact tracing, obviously a lot of provinces are not doing that really well. Toronto, apparently they've given up on it in places. What's that about? Certainly the global approach, I'd like to see us look a bit at that. The COVAX, which is an attempt globally to ensure that people around the world have access to vaccines. The ACT Accelerator, which hasn't got a whole lot of press, but is an attempt by WHO and a number of other international agencies to address the pandemic. So yeah, the first part, and let's get back to studying it, absolutely. And then there's a second part, procurement of documents, and I agree, and I believe in transparency. I really do. But I do also appreciate what the ministry and the department is saying in terms of what you're asking for here is a whole lot of documents at a time when, who was it, Mr. Barlow correctly said, I mean, this is our biggest health crisis and maybe our biggest crisis in the last 100 years. And they're the ones totally centrally dealing with it in the Ministry of Health. And now we're asking them to suddenly produce tons and tons of documents and have them all translated in French. I think maybe we should be trying to whittle that down a bit in terms of what we can and can't produce. There's also concerns about our relationship with the provinces. Obviously, healthcare is primarily a provincial jurisdiction, and our ability to cooperate and deal effectively with the province is something that's integral to how we deal with the second wave. So to produce documents which could potentially embarrass the province, harm our relationships with the province, wouldn't seem at this time to be a good idea. So one of the bottom lines, I think, is what we ought to be doing as a committee, and I want this to be working too, is why don't we concentrate on the live issues, not the issues that have occurred in the past. And certainly this procurement of documents obviously wants to dig up some dirt and look at absolutely everything. What's happened has happened. I don't think this is the time to be reviewing everything that's happened since the beginning of the pandemic. I think our function as a committee would be better served to be dealing with issues that are still live issues, where we can perhaps, if we actually get our act together, is start dealing with the problem in a constructive fashion rather than battling against each other over this. And I'm quite happy to face the fireworks on the procurement issue. I think we have to do it. I think the opposition wants those things, but I would suggest, why don't we leave that issue to a later date? I think the public and Canadians justifiably, if anyone actually watches what we do in the health committee, which is questionable, but if they do, they might well be saying, like, what are they doing? I mean, here it is, a pandemic, and here they're arguing over procurement of documents. I would suggest, why don't we leave it for 2 or 3 weeks and start actually looking at the issues again? And yes, you will come back to it. That is, and I think it's important that you come back to it because you are the opposition and that's what you do. But I'd suggest, like, why don't we leave this conversation for a later date and start actually doing something useful instead.
Thank you, Dr. Pawlowski. We go now to Mr. McGuire. Mr. McGuire, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I would have thought that a useful thing to do would be to discuss and examine and review all issues relevant to the situation, and that's why I'm supporting this amended motion that my colleague, Ms. Shadow Cabinet Minister for Health here, Michelle Rempel-Garner, has brought forward, and all is all-encompassing. What is more urgent? I mean, we can talk about a lot of things. Mental health is important, long-term care is important, but probably one of the most important things right now is making sure we can get testing for people in a timely manner. And we haven't had that. And so rapid and home testing approvals, these are what my people
Mr.
in my
Chair,
riding are wondering
point of order,
about.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Fisher, on a point of order, please.
Mr. McGuire called this an amended motion. Is it an amended motion?
As an amended motion, it would not be in order because Ms. Rempel-Garner cannot amend her own motion. However, she moved it as a separate motion. The other motion still exists out there, lying in wait for us to resume at some other time, should the occasion arise. This is a new motion in my view, and it is as in order as the previous motion.
Okay, thank you for the clarity there. I wasn't
Thank
certain.
you. Go ahead, Mr. McGuire, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Mr. Fisher for correcting me on that. But it is a motion, and I would gladly go back and discuss the earlier one because these issues are all in it. But in the sake of, for the sake of cooperation here, this new motion has been brought forward to try to get the immediacy of the situation on the table. My colleague, and it was pointed out by Mr. Pawlowski, this is the most important issue in Canada right now, one of them at least anyway, and people are watching the health committee because health is important to everybody right now in this country. And so we have finally got Parliament operating again, and it's an opportunity for us to immediately get into this and get the documentation. I can't see, I mean, Mr. Callaway in his opening comments said that, you know, somebody might say that this isn't being transparent. I would certainly say that because these documents are not coming forward. If there's nothing there, well, then just bring them forward and we'll get on with things. And that's, I mean, that is part of the number two in the original motion, was that in order to fully study this emergency situation, that's what we want to do. Study the emergency of it's recognized as an emergency, and it is an all-encompassing motion the way it's been presented today. It includes all issues. There are issues that we could speak about. They've been listed, but rapid testing has to be one of those. Vaccine development, all of these other things will be there as the world develops them. But we've got a situation now where rapid testing has already been okayed by the government, but we're not seeing it. We don't have it. All we're asking for is an opportunity to study this and let Canadians get their questions answered, because that's what we're seeing today. So anybody that says that all isn't encompassing, I just think they haven't read the motion or weren't listening to it when it was read out. So I think that the right balance does need to be struck here, and that we could easily move forward. And the reason that there's dates in here, if you want to move it back a week, on October 20th, tomorrow, we've already had that original motion for 10 days. So I'm in favor of starting tomorrow with this if we could, because the sooner we can get this information gathered together, the sooner we can make good decisions for Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. We go now to Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, please go ahead.
Thank you. This has been another interesting debate. In no particular order, I just wanted to comment on the motion that was moved by Ms. Rempel-Garner. To me, addressed the very problems that were identified by the Liberals last meeting. Last meeting, I distinctly heard Liberals say that they were concerned that the motion wasn't inclusive. I heard the Liberals say that they didn't like the long itemized list and felt that it was too prescriptive. I heard the Liberals say that it didn't include important issues that they wanted to study, like mental health or live-in care. So the motion that was moved this morning addresses every one of those. It eliminates the list that was so troubling to my Liberal colleagues last meeting. It is explicitly inclusive without being prescriptive. It is fair in the sense that it allocates witnesses. And it allows all parties to submit witnesses that reflect their own particular interests, which I think I can speak for all of us. I haven't heard any member of this committee say that they're not interested in the issues of mental health or live-in care or the federal health transfer or vaccine development. So it brings me to this, that I think that I'm hoping that I can stimulate some violent agreement here, that this is what I hear us saying. We all want to study COVID, and I think we should. And, you know, let's face it, there's 10,000 issues in health, and many of them are extremely important. So this is not to deny the importance of any other issue that we could be looking at. But we are in the middle of the second wave of a global pandemic. You know, I don't even need to speak about this. I think we're all, I hope my colleagues all agree that the number one public health issue on a national basis in this country right now is COVID. So I think that we all should agree and can agree that we should be studying COVID. Second, I think that we should all agree that we should adopt the evidence that we heard in the first session. Because we heard, you know, from January, February, all the way till July, we heard a lot of excellent testimony. Third, I do think that we should agree that we don't want to till well-tilled ground or things that we've covered in depth, but rather, I think we can agree that we can and should focus our inquiry to issues that are really important now. And I said this last meeting, I'll say it again this meeting. It's October of 2020. We are in a different position than we were in March, when this was brand new and so much was unknown. We know a lot more now. There's a lot more to be known for sure. So I think that we should be able to focus our inquiry. And to that end, I appreciate Ms. Rempel-Garner's amendment to say that, you know, this motion allows us to submit witnesses that would reflect that. So Ms. Sidhu wants to focus on long-term care. She can put witnesses in to that end. Mr. Van Bynen wants to focus on mental health, submit witnesses on mental health. I'd like to understand where we're at in vaccines. I'll submit that. Mr. Theriault wants to submit witnesses on the impact of federal transfer payments on the provinces. He can submit witnesses on that. These are areas that we can focus on. And finally, I think we can agree on a fair allocation of witnesses. I was very proud of this committee. We've operated very collegially over the last, well, in my experience, 5 years, and particularly over the last year, where we all were putting in an equal number of witnesses. And I think we got a really broad sampling of excellent witnesses that way. So I think the motion, as far as the study, I think we're all agreeing when I listen to each one of my colleagues on those broad points. Where obviously there's a sticking point is on the production issue. Now, I've been in Parliament 12 years. I think I can say without too much cynicism that those in government don't like it. Those in opposition do. I have yet to see a government that is enthusiastic about producing documents to the opposition, and opposition, of course, this is an effective tool for opposition to get information. I'm hoping that we can find a common ground. When I listen to my Liberal colleagues, I don't hear them say that they're opposed to production. I hear some comments that we should delay it a little bit. I hear some say that we should target it. But I must say two things. One is when we talk about transparency, this argument that it's very important, we just can't do it, is a fallacy. And that's kind of what I hear some of the arguments being, that, oh, you know, we're very much committed to it, but there's always a reason why I just can't do it right now. Well, frankly, transparency is important at all times. In fact, arguably, transparency is more important at times of great political importance. Transparency isn't something that happens when we don't have an important issue before us. It should be something that happens all the time. And frankly, if I take the Prime Minister at his word, he's on record as saying that repeatedly. Second, I reject categorically the argument that we don't have any time for transparency. Again, that argument is we really want to be transparent. We just can't burden our civil servants with it because they don't have the time. Well, that's a fallacy as well. Our civil servants are always working, I would hope, and they're always working on important issues. So the key really is, how can we, is there a way for us to find a middle ground on this, where we can hone this motion to get the government to produce documents to the opposition that are targeted, surgical, useful, and informative and revealing. Committees do play an important role in Parliament. And when Prime Minister Trudeau was elected in 2015, the Liberals recognized this. And I will take one little shot at my Conservatives colleagues. When they were in government, they did not treat committees in this way. They were controlled by the PMO, and there was no real production, and they did not treat committees with the respect for their independence that I think they should have been the case. But the Liberals said they were going to change that. And the committees, we have a very important number of roles. One is we have a constitutional and parliamentary historic power to order production of documents. And the reason for that is one of our functions, besides reviewing legislation and studying issues, is to serve as an accountability body. If we're not getting documents from the government to double check their political claims, who is? Who does? So I want to hear from my Liberal colleagues who say they believe in transparency, who say they believe in production, but who say that this motion is too broad or otherwise unacceptable. I want to see them draft their proposed production. So instead of rhetorically, and let's face it, the Liberals are filibustering this committee. They are talking this out because a productive measure would be, fine, Ms. Rempel-Garner has gone to the trouble of drafting her motion and put it out for debate. If it's too broad and you believe in transparency production, propose your amendments so that the rest of the committee members can see, well, what are you willing to produce, if anything? Because all I hear is a lot of general commitment to production and not a word about how you'll do it. So where I'll conclude is by saying, oh, and by the way, I want to say one thing too about Mr. Kellaway's comment. Frankly, having witnesses come before a committee and ask them to bring documents, that can be helpful, I agree, but that is not a substitute for the production request that is before us now. We're talking about documents that are exclusively within the control of the government. And witnesses don't just come bearing documents that way. We're talking about a discrete power of this committee to target documents. So where I will sum up is saying, can we agree on this? Can we agree that this committee will study COVID, that we will adopt the evidence from last session, that we will focus, let's roll our sleeves up and focus on the issues that are important, that we can reach consensus on? Can we agree on a fair allocation of witnesses? And to the Liberals, I ask, draft your production. What do you think would be a helpful production order, and so that we can see how far you're willing to go and see if we can find a common ground on the production of documents. Because I fear if we don't do this, that this issue will be resolved in a much more blunt way, and it won't be done by the consensus and collegiality and agreement that I think has typified this committee up to now. Yeah, those are my comments. Thanks for listening, colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. I note Mr. Davies mentioned Ms. Rempel's amended motion. I urge the members to not consider this an amended motion. It makes it difficult for me to see this as a separate motion, which as an amended motion, it would not be in order. You know, it's clearly of intense interest to this committee. So let us be able to continue it. We have next Ms. Rempel Garner.
Can I have a point of information? Is Mr. Davies suggesting at this time we accept the first part of the motion and leaving the second part for us to try to amend at a later date?
Mr. Davies, do you wish to respond to that point of information?
Well, thank you, Marcus, for the question. I'm not. I think there's a number of ways to go. I'm not trying to be completely prescriptive. What I'm talking about is conceptually to break this log jam. We do have a motion, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for correcting that. This is a new motion. What I'm suggesting is that the Liberals, instead of speaking against the motion generally, propose an amendment to the production section or any other part that they think they'd like to amend, so that we can see what it is that the Liberals are prepared to produce, and at least we can evaluate that.
Thank you, Mr. Davies, and thank you, Dr. Pawlowski, for your intervention. We go now to Ms. Rempel Garner on the debate. Go ahead.
I think this motion is great, and I'm very excited about getting the documents that Mr. Davies has outlined with great clarity as to why this can work, and my other colleagues have as well too. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't be able to get these documents unless the Liberals have something to hide. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rempel Garner. We go now to Mr. Van Bynen. You're up next. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I need to reflect back on some of the earlier comments about making amendments on the fly. And it reminds me of some things that my father used to say, and that is act in haste and repent at leisure. And that's my major concern on some of these items. I think that any changes that are being proposed and introduced should be given due consideration. And I know it's only 2 pages, but it's 2 pages in 11-point font. And for people like me, we need to reformat the document so that we can read it a little better. And so in some respect, it's dropping a motion like this on the table at the last minute is disrespectful.
I can't believe it.
Well, it's true.
That's
the reality, but thank you very much.
Would the members of the committee please mute themselves when they're not speaking? And we need no editorial comments, please. Go ahead.
And frankly, I think that it's disrespectful in any event. But my focus is to look forward and not to look back. And when I take a look at some of the things that were being proposed, like the checking into the reasons for closure of borders, like checking into or seeking documents and checking into and requesting that we now find out about the benefits of wearing non-medical masks, going into a number of documents and requesting a number of things that frankly are of no assistance to the 97 people in my constituency that have been identified as having COVID. I think what we should be doing here, and I appreciate Mr. Davis's comments, is we should talk about not about what's been done, but we should talk about what should be done going forward. There are plenty of opportunities for us to go back and check the documents, but I believe that the best purpose of this committee is to provide recommendations going forward based on what we hear from experts. I believe that we've had very extensive discussion in the 34 previous meetings that we've had. We've had extensive input from the 71 witnesses, and I think that we should finalize that report to determine the baseline for what we should be seeking as we go forward. There's a lot of really valuable information. So first, let's finish that first. Let's finish the report that we did in the first session, and then find out what recommendations come forward out of that. And that's what I think we should be focusing on recommendations that would go forward. My major concern, and I've seen a lot of finger wagging and people saying, you know, you should have done this, you should have done that. Well, frankly, my motion in terms of looking at mental health and how we can deal with the emerging pandemic is an opportunity to do something on a go-forward basis. And I don't want to see anybody on the opposition party when this pandemic gets out of hand saying, you should have, you should have. I am saying we should have. I am saying that we need to focus on emerging pandemic. I think that this is going to be far more trying than for our communities as we go forward, and far longer lasting. So my concern then is around the numerous things that have been put forward, and all it does is it takes us away from things that we should be focusing on. I think we should set priorities. I think that we should agree on what's important that provides us with information from experts that are pointing the way forward. These are things that we should consider. We heard some of that in the last session, and sadly, only one session was on mental health. And it's a serious concern that I have that we need to give plenty of thought now before it becomes a pandemic. There's an opportunity for us to do something proactively, and it's something that we should agree on, I think, as we go forward. And I look forward to the opportunity of putting my motion forward as well. But in terms of what's been said by Don, I think there's a lot of merit, and that we should go forward and try to find things that we can agree upon, but to the benefit of our constituents and not necessarily serving any political partisan masters. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr.
Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. We go now to Mr. Fisher. Mr. Fisher, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks for all the comments that all of the members have made today. You know, I had said last week that I felt like it was really important to, over my non-Thanksgiving turkey dinner while I was in isolation in Nova Scotia, I went over the motion that the Conservatives put forward. And, you know, I took the time to review that, what, again, I've called it an omnibus, but clearly it's a fishing expedition. And now today, another surprise. Some people say it's almost the same. Some people say it's different, but regardless, it handcuffs people when things are thrown at you. And then you have a brand new motion that's similar, but not exact. Maybe as Don said, and I believe and very clearly try to listen to Don when he speaks, because so often he makes sense. And his comment earlier about how this committee has worked well together, and he's going back in time prior to most of the members on this committee. But this committee did work very well together, even in the short time that we were all together. So we have a different motion, and we have 30 minutes to have a conversation about this motion. And 18 minutes of that 30 minutes, I was waiting for that motion to come into the mailbox because it was took a while to come by. I can tell you, Mr. Chair, that, and I can say this firsthand, from talking to my constituents, Canadians want members of Parliament to work together. They appreciate it. They notice when it's done, and they want solutions and not games. I've said this before, we need to look forward rather than look back. But what we're seeing here is we've heard from Sonia, we've heard from Tony Van Bynen, we've heard from Don, we've heard from Luke, we've heard from Mr. Barlow that they have motions that they want to move forward, but we're now well into our second meeting, and the agenda has been kind of for lack of a better term, hijacked with this one particular motion, which, again, as I started out, I called it an omnibus motion. But I enjoy the work that we do here on this committee and the committees I've been in the past. I think about I was on the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development. What an excellent example of a committee that worked really well together. We had all parties working together, and we produced really good substantive reports. And we had we had a unanimous report on protected areas across Canada, and that led to, I think that led to somewhere around $1 billion investment, in protected areas across Canada. Incredible investments and partnerships in nature protection. Mr. Chair, it led to solutions. And I was hopeful that this committee could be a place where members work together for all Canadians. I did listen to Don's comments about, finding a way forward. I was hopeful that enough members on this committee would want to work together and really undertake studies in a meaningful way so that we can all provide, and this is what it's all about. This is what committees do. They provide solid recommendations to the government. And this committee has done that in the past and can do that. We absolutely, make no mistake, we absolutely should continue studying COVID-19 in some type of form that is focused and less broad. And that will allow us to study COVID-19 in a really meaningful way. We have an incredible opportunity to work here, again, as a committee, and undertake a focused, meaningful study that's going to benefit Canadians now and moving forward. As was said earlier, we're in the second wave or the resurgence or whatever you want to call it. This is the time for us to be focusing on aspects of that. And just to go back to Mr. Van Bynen's motion, which the opposition parties voted to adjourn debate on, I believe, this is a massive issue. This is an issue that I hear about from constituents all the time. Canadians lost loved ones. Canadians couldn't see loved ones. Isolation was a problem before COVID-19. I can tell you that it's going to be one of the issues of our time when we finally find a way out of this. So we do have an incredible opportunity. So going through the new Conservative motion, or and I won't say the word, Mr. Chair, because I know you'll shut me down, but the new motion or the amended motion or whatever you want to call it. The first part is fine. I honestly can't wait to get back to work on this. I do feel that this is important. Probably, as Marcus said, one of the most important things of our time, at least in the last 100 years. First of all, and I'm not moving an amendment, but obviously we would have to move the date in this motion because that's tomorrow, and I think it's physically impossible for us. That's a small thing. Although I look forward to getting to work, due to logistics, I don't see how we're going to be able to start that study tomorrow. So when I go through the second part, I can't help but think, wow, who are the busiest people in the country right now? Frontline healthcare workers and health public servants. And Don said, and I agree, public servants are always working. But I'd say that this is a little bit of a different situation and a different life. Public servants, many of them having to work from home, are tasked with massive jobs in front of them here. And I think it's a little different than the norm. So this motion is asking hardworking public servants to stop what they're doing or do something in parallel while they're trying to keep Canadians safe. They're learning about this disease, this virus, COVID-19, as as the science changes on a regular basis and we learn more about it. I seem to be a popular person today, Mr. Chair. So, let's stop all of the work that the public servants are doing or find a way to work parallel to do all these things when it comes to producing all these documents. We're talking reams and reams and reams of documents. Mr. Davies also said that opposition love to produce documents like this. And I'm not negating that fact. But this is a massive document grab, asking the busiest public servants to stop everything or work in parallel. So maybe the Conservatives have forgotten that we're in a pandemic where, some of the provinces are indeed. I'm safely ensconced in the Atlantic bubble, but we have to take this very seriously. Some provinces are in bad shape and they need our help, and we've been helping and we've been partnering with them from day one. Canadians are best served and represented in this committee when we all work together. So the focus here must be on keeping Canadians safe. And so we talk a lot about transparency, and transparency is very important, and there are ways to make sure that we have the information that we need. If members feel that they need more information on the government's response from officials, we can study, as we study specific topics, they should absolutely request a briefing from officials or documents related to that specific topic. Specificity will make sure that we're not wasting the time of folks who are working to keep Canadians healthy. We can get briefings. Going back to the previous year in this committee, every time a member asked for briefings, we got briefings. We had briefings all the time, and they were invaluable to what we were trying to do. So we can get briefings. We can get that important information to move forward, to do our jobs, to study the impacts of COVID-19. So I like fishing as well, but fishing belongs in our beautiful oceans, rivers, and lakes, and not in the House of Commons or in the House of Commons committee. So let's study COVID-19 without forcing Canada's hardworking public servants, the folks that are working hard to keep all of us safe, asking them to spend hours and hours sifting through old emails and documents for the sake of somewhat partisan games, Mr. Chair. So I just want to address specifically one of the things that was in the first motion and in the second motion, and that's personal protective equipment. The government, including so many of these public servants that are extremely busy, everyone is still working around the clock, to make sure that we have that personal protective equipment, that PPE that we need to fight COVID-19. Our first priority in this pandemic was getting equipment and supplies directly into the hands of our frontline healthcare workers to keep them safe. So recognizing the challenges and the opportunities of an increasingly competitive global environment, Canadian industry, my gosh, Mr. Chair, Canadian industry stepped up in a huge way to support our procurement efforts. This has been, and Mr. Kellaway spoke about this earlier, this is an incredible Team Canada effort. From across the whole country, companies have been working with the Government of Canada, or they're working directly with provinces and territories to manufacture and procure PPE. Our government has been focused on solutions on keeping Canadians safe, and these Canadian companies have been doing incredible work. A while back, I had the opportunity to visit Stanfield's. Now, Mr. D'Entremont will know exactly what I'm talking about, so will Mr. Kellaway. Stanfield's is arguably an historic company in Nova Scotia. And they have between 300 and 500 employees on a regular basis. And those folks that work there or were hired over the summer because of COVID-19 are so proud of the fact that, and the community of Truro and Bible Hill and surrounding areas are hugely proud of this company for, a pivot, a retrofit. They stepped up and they are producing tons and tons and tons of medical grade gowns. And they're not alone. Canada has 15 separate contracts with Canadian manufacturers for the production of millions and millions. Last count, I think it was 32 million medical grade gowns. That's just from Canadian manufacturers. I mean, I can show you the website that shows you how many medical gowns Canada has procured locally, domestically, and internationally. So deliveries are arriving regularly, and not just from Stanfield's, from Canada Goose, Rudell Medical in Scarborough, George Curry in Laval. We've also, Mr. Chair, speaking to PPE, we've already had Canadian companies contribute and deliver over 7 million face shields from companies like Kitchener, Ontario's the Canada Shield or Toronto Stamp. with orders for over 43 million more just from Canadian companies. So we've all heard about the importance of N95 respirator masks, and so many have already been procured for Canadian frontline workers. I'm particularly impressed, Mr. Chair, with the Quebec companies who have stepped up for this procurement. Companies like Medicom, 20 million N95 respirator masks and 24 million surgical masks per year for the next 10 years. So we're protecting Canadians now, and we will work to protect Canadians into the future. Also, huge thanks to New Brunswick's Lumen Ultra for stepping up and producing enough reagent for 500,000 more tests per week to help meet Canada's new needs now and well into 2021. And we talk about ventilators. I know Marcus loves to hear about ventilators. Well, Canadian companies have delivered hundreds and hundreds of ventilators. So, you know, going back to transparency for a moment, we talk about that a lot, the accountability and the transparency. And yes, it is critically important. Canadians, I'm sure, know that we are in a fierce global competition for PPE produced beyond our borders. We need to make sure that we as a country are cautious about disclosing certain information on specific contracts or suppliers. Now, this could jeopardize Canada's supply chains for these life-saving products. But I will say, Mr. Chair, to the committee, whenever possible, we are publicly announcing contracts through this pandemic. We will continue to do so. And if you notice, Mr. Chair, we're posting this online. Important details on orders, on deliveries of PPE. We post them online. So let me reiterate, I firmly believe that it's important to Canadians, and it should be important to all of us, to continue focusing our efforts on COVID-19. But I truly feel we need to do so with some specificity. I think we have an incredible opportunity here to work together and undertake a focused, meaningful study that will benefit Canadians now and moving forward. And I will ask all my colleagues of all parties to please do what we've done in the past to work together on this. Let's be specific, let's pinpoint our focus, and let's get to work. Mr. Chair, I do have, let me see if I can find this here. I do have, no, trying to find a possible way forward here as Mr. Davies suggested, and I can't find the amendment, proposed amendment. No, I can't find it. Okay, here it is. So I'll if I could, Mr. Chair, I'll read what I have here as a suggested amended motion.
Go ahead.
That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the Standing Committee on Health commence a study on the emergency situation facing Canadians in light of the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that this study evaluate, review, and examine all issues relevant to this situation, and that this study begin no later than, obviously, we would have to change the date. Let's suggest, for argument's sake, we add a week to that, that the committee table its findings. Sorry, Mr. Chair, this computer's going funny here. In the House upon completion, that the government provide a response to these findings within 30 sitting days, and that evidence and documentation received by the committee during its study of the Canadian response to the outbreak of the coronavirus commenced during the first session of the 43rd Parliament to be taken into consideration by the committee in the current study, and that each party will be entitled to one witness per 1 hour witness panel and 2 witnesses per 2-hour witness panel, and that in order to fully study the emergency situation, we request pertinent documents topic by topic after hearing from witnesses and ascertaining which documents are relevant to a productive study of the issue. So I'm penciling that together, Mr. Chair, the best of my ability. I'm not sure if that speaks to what Mr. Davies had suggested, Perhaps what we could do out of respect for the members is, I'm not sure if you are willing or able, or if the committee wishes to take a 5-minute suspension and have folks be able to take a look at that. I don't want to by any means handcuff anyone. That is pretty much taken right verbatim from the Conservative motion and then modified, I think, based on the things that Don was saying to find a way forward. Anyway, Mr. Chair, I seek your guidance on that. Is that something you would permit? Maybe a 5-minute look at that?
Just on that point of order, I think, Mr. Chair.
There wasn't a point of order.
It's pretty straightforward what the Liberals are trying to do. They're trying to remove the document production order from the motion.
Ms. Rempel-Garner, you have not been recognized. I just asked, I may have been mute, so I apologize, but I asked Mr. Fisher if he has in fact moved that motion or moved that amendment. He expressed it as a proposed amendment, so I'm asking if he did in fact propose it.
Yeah, sure. I'll propose that motion.
I'm sorry, did you move it or not?
Yes, I will move that as an amendment to the motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fisher. So Ms. Rempel-Garner, could you proceed with your point of order, please?
Sorry, Chair. I guess I would ask if this is a substantive enough motion to make it a separate motion, because it has completely removed the document production component of the original motion. So I do think that with regard to the motion that's at hand, basically what the Liberals are doing is stripping out the document production orders as they are doing in other committees right now. So I would argue that it is enough of a change that it's its own motion, and that we should proceed with my motion. Like, I mean, the motion, it's not like it's amending what documents are produced in what period of time. It's just saying no documents will be produced. And also I'm concerned.
That's not actually, Mr.
Well, if I can finish, I still have.
Yeah, but you're not on a point of order. You have the floor. I'm asking a point of order.
Actually, Mr. Fisher, Ms. Rempel-Garner was recognized on a point of order. I would ask Ms. Rempel-Garner to
sure.
come to her point.
Yeah, sure. So I'm asking if, Chair, if it's a substantive motion in and of itself. It's not an amendment to the document production. The other, it's actually removing it.
Mr. Chair, I did ask for a point of order.
I'm finishing my point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yours wasn't a point of order.
So yes, it is. Actually, when you're talking about,
Mr.
Fisher, when you're talking about the substance of a motion and whether or not it's admissible, that's actually the definition of a point of order. Thank you. So the other point I would raise on that is that I have some I'd like some clarity on the way that this motion is worded now, and I don't need a week to look at it. It actually doesn't have any clarity on who is determining the relevancy of the documents, and to me that's problematic as well. It also has removed all of the stipulations around what would be confidential and what wouldn't. And that's also, I think, such a substantive amendment that it would be its own motion. So I'd just like clarity on that point too, because it seems like it's a pretty big change from the original form and spirit of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rempel-Garner. Mr. Fisher, did you wish to respond on the points raised in this point of order?
Again, I wasn't removing the documents. I was suggesting that they would be determined, as Mr. Davies had suggested, when they are needed based on things that we are studying.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. So,
could I just have a point of order, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Davies, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure that Mr. Fisher has properly characterized what I said, but I do appreciate the attempt to deal with production. At least we have something on the table. I'm just wondering if I think the first part of the motion, I suspect may be largely acceptable to the committee members, but the second part is clearly something that is going to require some focus. Can we get that second part on production sent around in writing?
Certainly. So Mr. Fisher has moved the amendment. I take it as a valid amendment. Mr. Fisher, have you
Mr. Chair.
Can we take 5 minutes to have that sent around to all our colleagues here, Mr. Chair?
Sure, but before we do that, let me just observe that we have passed the normal time of our meeting termination. I'm asking if it is the will of the committee to carry on. Is there any dissent? No dissent, so we will carry on. So, sure.
Monsieur le Président.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I would like to set a determined time. Now, for 2 hours, the Liberals have been speaking and speaking, and now, after having been speaking for 2 hours, they finally bring forth an amendment. So let's be serious. If we want people to work together and people to work together collaboratively, we have to be serious. And we have to work. I've already said this. We have to work within the time frame that has been allotted and not do this time of last-minute maneuvering. If the Liberals were prepared to work today, they should have been able to table an amendment in the beginning and not to speak and speak and speak on endlessly and repeat themselves. I would appreciate, Mr. Chair, that if we are extending the meeting, that we determine the time, and then we'll adjourn and we'll decide after each and every one of us having done our homework.
Thank you, Mr. Theriault. We have the option. I do not have the option to arbitrarily terminate the meeting unless there's excessive disorder, unless there's physical impediments such as not having access to the resources. So it is up to the meeting, up to the committee whether to continue or not. I have asked the committee if there is any dissent to carrying it on. It's up to you as members of the committee to do so or not. Did you wish to make a motion to adjourn, or at this time, or what is your? I guess please clarify your point.
I would like to suggest a 15-minute extension to the meeting.
So I think that would require. So it's an amendment to adjourn at a specific time. I'm not sure if that's in order at this time. Mr. Clerk, I wonder if you could give me some advice on this. If we could just, we'll suspend for a couple of minutes while I talk to the clerk. Thank you very much. To adjourn with a condition is a substantive motion. Since there is already a motion and an amendment on the floor, a substantive motion at this time would not be in order. Mr. Theriault, you'd be certainly welcome to raise a motion of adjournment when the time comes. So we do not have the will of the committee to adjourn at this time. We will carry on now with Ms. Sadu. Please go ahead. So we are now dealing with Mr. Fisher's amendment. Does the committee wish to have some time, as Mr. Fisher suggested, to receive the amendment and consider it?
Mr. Chair, just a point of order on that. we did ask for clarification whether Mr. Fisher's proposed amendment should be a motion in of itself. I think it substantially changes the motion that we are talking about. It completely neuters what the initial motion is on the floor. So I think we're looking for some direction from the chair to make a ruling if this amendment from Mr. Fisher is indeed an amendment or a substantive enough document that this should be a motion on its own.
Well, I believe I've already ruled on that it is a legitimate amendment. It's really up to the mover of the amendment to decide to what extent it modifies or seeks to modify the original motion. So I believe it is in order. So I believe we do have an amendment on the floor. And so my question again to the committee is, do we wish to suspend for 5 or 10 minutes while the amendment is distributed?
Mr. Chair, I have floor now, right?
No, we're still dealing with the matter of whether or not we are going to suspend and so forth. After we resolve this, we will certainly go to you. You were next on the list. So do we have, is there anyone who objects to us suspending for, say, 10 minutes while the amendment is distributed?
Mr. Chair, given that we still have to take a look at the amendment, given the concerns that have been expressed by our colleague, why don't we adjourn this meeting to our next meeting, and that will give us an opportunity to take a look at the amendment that's being proposed, and we are getting into close to question period, if I understand correctly.
Is that
a motion to adjourn?
So we have on the floor a motion to adjourn.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'll put motion to adjourn the meeting.
So Mr. Van Bynen has already moved that motion, so we will, is it the will of the committee to adjourn at this time? Yes. Anyone who dissents, please speak up.
You need to call a recorded vote, Mr. Chair.
So Ms. Rempel-Garner is calling for a recorded vote. It is within the rules to if we can get agreement or on a matter of division, to pass something on division. However, you have requested a recorded vote, so therefore we will ask the clerk. Please go ahead, clerk, and take a recorded vote on the motion to adjourn.
Monsieur Thériault.
D'accord.
Agreed.
Mr. Barlow.
No.
Mr. D'Entremont.
Nope.
Mr. McGuire. Mr. McGuire. Miss Rempel-Garner.
No.
Mr. Fisher.
Yes.
Mr. Kellaway.
Oui.
Mr. Pawlowski.
Yes.
Miss Sidhu.
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Mr. Van Bynen, you're muted.
Yes.
Mr. Davies.
No.
Mr. McGuire.
No.
So 6 yeas, 5 nays.
Thank you to the committee. The vote is to adjourn at this time.
Yep.
I therefore declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.